Welcome, everyone, to Conversations That Matter here at the New American Magazine. I'm your host, Alex Newman, senior editor of the New American Magazine. We have a very, very special guest for you today. Her name is Thara Tenney, and among other things, she's the daughter of LaVoy Finicum. I'm sure you remember that story. We covered it very extensively here at the New American. If you're a regular reader, a regular viewer, she is the eldest daughter of the Finicum family, LaVoy and Jeanette Finicum, the dozen of them. And after the tragic murder of her father, she took a year to travel the country with her mother, speaking about what happened. And then she wrote a book that's absolutely extraordinary. It's a book dedicated to preserving the history of what happened and the legacy of her father. It's an incredible book. I actually have a copy. And if you don't yet, you need one. It's called Liberty Rising, One Cowboy's Ascent, The Murder of LaVoy Finicum, as told by his daughter. Thara Tenney, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with just a refresher for the folks out there who maybe don't remember all the details, or for maybe folks who are new to the movement. What happened to your dad? Why did government agents fill him with bullets one day on the side of a snowy road in Oregon?
Sure. And thank you again, Alex, for having me on your show and sharing your network with me. I appreciate that opportunity. My dad, in January of 2016, traveled to the state of Oregon because he was watching a story of the Hammond family there, a fellow ranching family, because he was a rancher too. And they had been suffering. They were victims of circumvention of law for over a series of probably 15 years. And they were going to have to report to the prisons again for the second time on the same offense. And so his conscience was shocked, and he knew tyranny was in play, and he wanted to just show respect to to the Hammond ranching family before they reported to the prisons. And so he went along with some other cowboys, and when they got there, they had talked amongst themselves and decided to protest peacefully and to practice a claim of adverse possession. And so they decided to very strategically occupy a bird refuge that was like 30 miles out of the town there, a very rural area, not a residential area. And they did that, and they started the process of this adverse possession while peacefully protesting the bureaucracy, regulatory land laws that had led to the Hammond family being incarcerated for the second time on the same offense. And so that's what they were doing. And of course, they were we call it label lynched. They were falsely characterized in the media, and it got global news. And it ended, it was about a 40-day occupation, and they were going and coming and were invited by neighboring counties to come speak about principles of liberty, and the community members were feeding them and funding them. But this wasn't being reported in the mainstream media, of course. And on their way to an event that had been planned in the neighboring county, there was a roadblock set up, and they were ambushed. And that's the fateful day that my dad ended up being shot in the back 3 times with his hands up in the universal sign of surrender. And it ended with him bleeding out in the snow. No medical assistance was rendered. No warrants were out for his arrest. No laws were broken. His right to due process was completely violated. We found out in court discovery after the event that there was a falsified threat assessment that they used to justify their premeditated lethal force. And so it's just really conscience shocking. The people who he was with, they were incarcerated for about 10 months after his murder. And the first group of defendants who went to trial, who did not take a plea deal, they were all acquitted by a jury of their peers. And so it's just a tragic story that is so relevant because the outcome, the climax of the story, the tragedy is evidence that our system, our sacred Republican system of government, is not functioning in the way that it was intended to.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Thara. And I think so many millions of us who watched that killing, just on video, were thinking the exact same thing. It was unbelievable. It was shocking to the conscience. Talk a little bit about your dad. I was never able to meet him personally, although I've met your mom many times since then. But who was your dad? I mean, we've all seen the pictures and the videos of him on his horse. I mean, a true cowboy. But who was he as a person? Obviously, he raised the 12 wonderful children. But just talk a little bit about your dad, who he was, and what he loved, and things like that.
Well, he was your typical son of the West. He preferred to be among the sagebrush and the sand than in large crowds. He was God-fearing. There wasn't a Sunday where he wasn't fashioned in his white shirt and tie unless he was on the verge of fever or whatever. He was God-fearing, and he was self-taught. He took his education seriously, very well read, and a leader in his family and his community. He served in church capacities as well as seeking to just apply civics and to maintain correct principles in his local government. Law-abiding too. He joked that he never had a parking violation, and he never, not the good old boy type guy. He never had addictive behaviors like alcohol, or he just was your good American contributing member of society.
Yeah, maybe one of the last of a dying breed. Unfortunately, I used to watch some of his little YouTube videos where he'd go sit under a tree on the ranch and just share his thoughts. He truly was an extraordinary individual. Thara, how is that family holding up? I can't even imagine the loss of a figure like your father. But how are you and your siblings and the grandkids all holding up? And of course, your mom, Jeanette.
Yeah, my mother, she's a saint. She's a strong, strong woman to be thrust into the political arena the way that she was. She is, and she does not claim the strength as her own. She gives credit where credit is due, and that is to her God. All of us siblings, we're all adults now. At the time, this was 7 years ago. This January, it's 7 years ago. And so my youngest was, I think, around 10 years, my oldest was 10 years old, and he's now an adult. So my youngest sister at the time, she was in a basketball game in her high school, so she was still in that high school. But we're all adults now, and we've all gone through the grieving loss trauma that was caused as a result of his loss of life in that traumatic way that was in a disgustingly way broadcast for people to mock at in the way that they did. But I just want to point out that, our story is no new thing to humanity. It is personal and traumatizing to us, and it's so sacred to us. But things like this have happened throughout the duration of the human experience on planet Earth. I mean, you talk about when you study the Holy Bible, the most ancient, well-known narrative that most people have in their home. And Solomon, the king of Israel, he says, what did he's known for saying? There's no new thing under the sun. And so I've done a lot of research to familiarize myself with others who've gotten into the crosshairs of people who have abandoned correct principle. And that's brought me a lot of comfort, and also empowered me to be willing to be vulnerable to tell my story, because we humans respond to story and to narrative. It's powerful. It's so much more powerful than theory that's removing of that human connection. So it's enabled me to want to tell my story more instead of just hold it sacred here, so that with the hope and desire that it will shock the conscience of others into the willingness for them to do the due diligence to become competent, and then to sacrifice to do what is necessary for the preservation of the separations of controls within our system of government.
Powerful stuff, Thara. We're going to go to break real quick, and then when we get back, I want to ask you about the pursuit for justice and why you wrote the book and how people can get a copy. So, folks, stay with us. We'll be right back here on Conversations That Matter. I'm your host, Alex Newman. Stay tuned.
I certainly would not want a constitutional convention. I mean, whoa. Who knows what would come out of that?
It isn't the Constitution that's the problem. It is the people who ignore the Constitution.
What we need are just more people that would read the one we have.
It's up to us to hold our elected officials accountable,
who understand the Constitution and are willing to take a stand when necessary.
Thara, I want to ask you about justice. You know, this is something that was just abhorrent. What have you guys been doing? I understand there were some lawsuits filed at some point, but what's the status of that? Has anyone been held accountable? Will anyone be held accountable? And what are you guys doing toward that end?
That's a great question. From the moment that his life was taken, us as a family has been decided that we were going to seek every method necessary to hold out of control agents accountable, because that is our obligation as Americans, to not allow this type of egregious behavior to go just sweep it under the rug. My mother, she's not one to just lay down dead. And she's a profound, strong woman. We intend to do it with dignity and respect and with competence. It's been quite the journey, because at the very beginning there, us being thrust into the political arena the way that we were, it was uncertain as to who we could trust. There was a lot of people who were inserting themselves into our life who had honest, pure intentions, but also those who had ill intent. And it took a lot of prayer and divine intervention we prayed people to us, and then time enabled us to see the fruits of others so that we could disassociate ourselves with those people. The statute of limitations was 2 years, but in order to preserve our right to file a wrongful death claim, we had to file that within a year. So I'm going to spare you all the crazy details of the shenanigans of human nature, but we were able to get that first year deadline taken care of. And then the second year deadline to file our official claim came, and it was filed. And we were at this point working with the same attorneys who had won the acquittal in Oregon and who also had won the trial that was connected in Nevada. But the main attorney, Marcus Mumford, started receiving pressure from the DOJ, and he could no longer practice law in the state of Oregon. And so he started to practice law in Utah, which was his home state. And then he mysteriously ends up dead in his chair, and they don't know why. And he was our lead attorney. And so then it transitioned to Morgan Philpott, who was the second voice in the Oregon and Nevada trials. And Morgan starts receiving this pressure from the DOJ, and his paralegal ends up in prison with a 15-year sentence. And so it's just coincidental, maybe it's a word, that all of the characters that have helped preserve liberty and to expose the corruption layer upon layer are receiving this pressure. Anyhow, we got filed for the second, and we met the second year deadline. However, the judge dismissed with prejudice. And I would love to read a quote from our attorney as to why it was dismissed, because his language articulates it perfectly. He said, quote, Morgan Philpott, "It was dismissed on the principle of late filing. The whole principle of access to justice is that we don't make decisions on cases unless we get to the merits of the case. This is an underlying principle of the law. And here we have a case that says, you're late, dismissal with prejudice. You have no right whatsoever to have your case heard." He says, "I don't care how many innocent mistakes an attorney makes. There is a doctrine within the law that says that you can file that's titled excusable neglect or good cause. And if you cite this, then it is the duty of the court system to hear the merits of the case and not dismiss with prejudice on some technicality like that." And so with the pressure that Morgan Philpott was experiencing, and his paralegal is now in prison, we finally were able to get connected with the John Pierce law firm, which is the same attorney and law firm that is representing the January 6th defendants. And so now they're taking our case, and we are appealing to the Supreme Court.
Wonderful. So you're appealing now to the U.S. Supreme Court of the United States? Mm-hmm. Wow. Excellent. Well, please keep us updated on that. Hugely important. And so, in other words, though, the people who shot your dad are still roaming around free. They have not been sanctioned in any way. They've not been reprimanded, as far as we know. There's no consequences at all.
Well, it was an orchestration between Oregon State Police and the FBI. And it was a falsified threat assessment that came from the BLM, the federal level. And so the FBI came in and applied pressure to OSP, Oregon State Police, and said, you got to do this. And so because of that orchestration and the ambiguity there without a checks and balance between the two different, the federal and the state law enforcement that we need to troubleshoot and fix, by the way, that's one thing that I'd like to do. They justified lethal force on that falsified threat assessment. Now, the FBI agent who was in charge that day, he was indicted by a grand jury and he went to trial. And it's interesting, the head juror, after coming out, reported saying, we were all on the edges of our seats, knowing that, they had did it, meaning OSP, Oregon State Police, or, no, they did it, meaning the FBI. And they were colluding and creating enough reasonable doubt to where the jury said it was not my duty to know who had shot the unidentified shots, but it was my duty to not convict a man if there was reasonable doubt. And after the jury didn't find him guilty because of those reasons, and there was still unquestioned shots. And he, after that point, was put under what is called administrative investigation for his misconduct on that mission. And so as far as him being held accountable, I don't know. I don't have words for it. I'm learning to forgive that man.
Wow. Well, it takes a very strong person to be able to do that, but it is the Christian thing to do. Yeah. And, so many things have come out about this in the intervening years. We found out, for the Bundy Ranch, the guy at the BLM who was working on this, we found out from the Wooten memos was an anti-Mormon bigot. We found out that that there was just so much corruption and malfeasance, and it just seems to be a cesspool over there. We're down to just a few minutes, Thara, but I want to, why did you write the book? And what will people learn by reading it?
I appreciate you asking. I wrote my book because my youngest was like 2, and I realized that they were going to have adult questions. Why was their grandfather shot and killed? And why was it broadcasted for everyone to mock at? And why is he labeled as a terrorist, right? And they deserve answers to their adult questions. And I wanted it to come from me, their mother, not from a Google search where they're going to get falsified information. So that was the backbone of my motivation. Number 2, it was to provide a tool for people who are sincerely wanting to know the truth so that they can come to the source, and that they can, if they're willing to give of their time to learn and do their due diligence, they have a source to be able to do that. We've also worked with Center for Self-Governance to create a documentary series, which is absolutely powerful. It's a great study on human nature and the interaction with governments and the butterfly effects that take place when boundaries aren't maintained. So I highly recommend that documentary series as well.
Excellent, Thara. And where can people watch the documentary, and where can people, what's the best place, I should say, to get a copy of the book, Liberty Rising, One Cowboy's Ascent, The Murder of LaVoy Finicum, as told by his daughter?
Well, the best place to get it, I do have a copy here. This is what it looks like. And you can find this on Amazon, and there's a paperback, Kindle, and audiobook. I actually recorded the audiobook myself, and you have clippings of my father speaking for himself as well as in the audiobook. So Amazon is the best place to get my book. The audiobook is also available on iTunes. As far as the documentary series go, I invite people to visit our family website. It's One Cowboy, Stand for Freedom, all spelled out. You can buy the DVDs there. You also could visit centerforselfgovernance.com, because that is the president and co-founder, Mark Herr, is the director of those documentary series, and their website can direct you as well.
Excellent. Thara Tenney, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing this powerful, powerful testimony about your dad and about what happened. We really appreciate it. Folks out there, I highly recommend you get a copy of this book. Definitely go watch those documentaries. I've seen a lot of them myself. Cannot recommend them highly enough. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I'm Alex Newman. This is Conversations That Matter. Again, the name of the book, one more time, is Liberty Rising, One Cowboy's Ascent, The Murder of LaVoy Finicum, as told by his daughter. Thanks again. Till next time, God bless you all.
The John Birch Society has been working tirelessly since 1958 to preserve freedom, safeguard the Constitution, and restore our God-given rights. We continually educate voters and lead the freedom movement. Join us as we work against a tyrannical one-world government. United as one, we can defeat this conspiracy against a free America. JBS founder Robert Welch said, "Education is our total strategy and truth our only weapon." Join us in restoring this great nation.